Welcome to section 1.3 of chapter 1, Chemistry and Measurements. This chapter is very cool. We're going to talk about units of measurement. And when I talk about measuring, a lot of times we don't think about it when we're measuring things. Every time you check your watch or the clock, you're checking to see what time it is. Okay, and time is in hours and minutes and seconds. So that's a measurement. How far you're walking, how heavy your backpack is, what is the temperature outside, all kinds of things you measure every day and you're not even really aware of it. Scientists use the metric system to measure, and there's another system that we use. It's called the International System of Units, and it's SI for short, and people ask me all the time why it's not IS, and it's because it was in French originally, and so it's Système International, and that's why it's SI instead of IS. But it is the official system of measurement that's used throughout the scientific world for length, volume, mass, temperature, and time. And so we're going to learn what those units are. So, the metric system has units that are standard. The SI system also has units that are standard. Sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're not. For example, the unit for length in the metric system is the meter, and it's also the meter in the SI system. Volume, however, we talk about liters and milliliters in the metric system, but the standard SI is actually the cubic meter, or m to the third power. Mass, we use grams in the lab because they're a lot smaller than the SI unit, which is kilograms. Temperature, the metric is Celsius, the SI is Kelvin. And what do we use in America? We use what? Fahrenheit. So there are some conversions that we have to do sometimes. And thankfully, time, the standard is seconds, because things happen really fast in science a lot of times. And so we may have to convert to other units, but usually seconds is adequate for most anything we're doing. So when we're measuring length, we use different measuring devices. You could use a meter stick. You could use a yard stick if you're in America. And in those measuring devices, in a meter stick, which is about 39.4 inches, so it's pretty close to a yardstick, you would use centimeters. Okay, so each one of these is a centimeter. All right, and in the yardstick you would use inches. Okay, and the bad thing for us in inches is we have to use fractions a lot. Well, the metric system uses decimals, which is a lot easier. But we do have to convert back and forth, and by definition for these SI people, 1 inch is equal to 2.54 centimeters. Okay, so 1 inch is the same as 2.54 centimeters. 1 meter is 1.09 yards. 1 meter is 100 centimeters. And 1 meter is also 39.4 inches. So there are definitions that we kind of have as we go through. We may have to do some conversions later. Volume, we said liters and milliliters is what we use, but remember the SI unit is what? Cubic meters. 1 liter is equal to 1,000 milliliters. 1 liter is also equal to 1.06 quarts, and 1 quart is equal to 946 milliliters. What we use in the lab to measure volume a lot of times is a graduated cylinder, and you're going to see those when we get to the lab portion. Mass is measured with grams and kilograms. Kilogram is the SI standard. We do measure in grams because if you measure in kilograms, you'd be using a whole big old amount of things every time you did an experiment. A kilogram is, to give you some perspective, is 2.20 pounds. So that's quite a bit of material. 1 pound is 454 grams. If you put a nickel on the balance and measure that, a nickel weighs about 5.01 grams. So that gives you an idea of how light that is actually. Temperature we measure, as I said, typically in Celsius, and then an absolute scale that's called Kelvin. The Kelvin scale is low temperatures, okay? Kelvin is the same as minus 273 degrees Celsius. So we don't really measure Kelvin on a thermometer outside like we've got here. We'll measure Celsius or we'll measure Fahrenheit. And they don't have a really easy conversion, so we're going to learn how to do that later. Time is seconds. The second is the SI and the metric. Okay, the standard measure for 1 second is, there's a thing called an atomic clock that's locked away somewhere that's perfectly accurate to the second. And so it is our measure for exactly what a second is, and everything else is calibrated to that. We use things like stopwatches and watches on our wrists and things like that to measure time in seconds or minutes or hours or whatever we're needing to do. All right, so here's our learning check. What are the SI units for the following? What was our SI unit for volume? Do you remember? The cubic meter, that's right. What about mass? The big one, the kilogram. What about length? The meter. And what about temperature? SI is Kelvin. Okay, it's that absolute scale. How'd you do? If you didn't get them right, go back and review, because obviously those are important or I wouldn't be asking you. All right, so that's the end of units of measure. I'll see you soon.